is a Saturday afternoon, and across the United States, supermarkets are hopping, and parking lots are full. Inside, brightly lit shelves are neatly stocked with every imaginable foodstuff and household item. Shoppers maneuver their carts through the aisles, deciding which products to buy from a seemingly endless array of choices. In 1989, Boris Yeltsin, a popular political leader from the Soviet Union and former chief of the Moscow Communist Party, visited a supermarket in Houston, Texas. It was one of many stops on a 2-week tour of the United States. To Yeltsin, the sight of ordinary people doing their weekly grocery shopping was anything but ordinary. In fact, to someone who had lived his whole life under communism, it was a revelation. A local newspaper reported that Yeltsin wandered the aisles, shaking his head in amazement. He sampled cheese and produce. He stared at the meat displays. He stopped customers to ask about the items in their carts and how much they cost. He asked the manager whether special training was necessary to run a supermarket. Yeltsin's reaction was understandable. By the late 1980s, the state-run Soviet economy was in shambles. Consumer goods were scarce. People had to wait in long lines to buy food and other necessities. Store shelves were frequently empty of all but one or two poorly made goods. Even the privileged Communist Party elite did not enjoy such abundance as could be found in the average American supermarket. The stark contrast between American and Russian living standards was, as Yeltsin later wrote, shattering. When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people. That such a potentially super-rich country as ours has been brought to a state of such poverty. It is terrible to think of it. Boris Yeltsin, Against the Grain, 1990. The visit confirmed for Yeltsin the painful truth about the Soviet economic system. It was a complete failure. In Houston and other American cities, it saw a very different economic system at work, in which he saw that system running. In this lesson, you'll explore different economic systems. You will learn how each one functions and who makes the decisions in each type of economy. You will also learn why some types of economy have succeeded while others have failed. If resources are unlimited, we all could have whatever we want, but resources are limited, so people must make choices about what to have and what to give up. This also forces societies to make choices. The larger and more advanced a society is, the more numerous and complex these choices may be. In deciding how to allocate limited resources, every society, from a tribe of people living in the Kalahari Desert to a modern industrial nation like the United States, must answer three fundamental economic questions. Each society answers these questions differently, depending on its priorities. The questions, however, are the same for everybody. Because resources are limited, no society can produce everything its people might want. This raises the question, what goods and services are most wanted and needed? For example, should the United States conserve wilderness areas for recreational purposes, or open them up to logging or oil exploration? Should the U.S. steel industry produce more car parts or more beams for skyscrapers? What do consumers want or need more? Sneakers or diapers? Teachers or dentists? Books or video games? With millions of possible products and many different interests competing for the same limited resources, the choices seem endless. Even the simplest societies face difficult choices. Vanuatu is a nation of several small islands in the South Pacific. Vanuatu's economy has long depended on agriculture, but tourism is growing in importance. The question looming over Vanuatu's people is what will benefit them more, putting more resources into growing foods or expanding tourist services. As a society, Vanuatuans must decide. The answer to this question is not as simple as it may seem. You know that goods and services are produced by combining the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. But how exactly is this done, and in what combination? Consider wheat production. How should land, labor, and capital be used to raise this essential grain? Should wheat be grown mainly on giant factory farms? That is the way an American agribusiness raises wheat. But in a different society, wheat might be grown on smaller family farms. Think about another example. Hats. Should hats be crafted individually, by hand, or in factories by machines? Each society has to decide for itself the answer to these questions. At this point, you're probably wondering why a society as a whole has to make decisions about hats. Don't hat manufacturers decide how to produce headwear? In the United States, they do. But that is because our society gives them that choice. Not all societies work this way. In other words, who gets what? This last question is a difficult one to answer because it raises the complicated question of fairness. Who deserves what? Again, every society finds its own answer. Goods and services are distributed in a variety of ways. The ability to pay is the approach most of us know best, It essentially says that anyone who can afford to buy a hat can have one. Another approach is equal distribution. This approach was adopted by the Soviet Union before its collapse. Unfortunately, goods were in such short supply that lines formed from everything. Instead of distributing goods equally, the system favored those who got in line early and had time to wait. As a result, some people got more than their share, while others got nothing. This brings us to yet another form of distribution: first come, first served. As in the Soviet Union, this approach often prevails when quantities are limited. Goods such as concert and theater tickets are usually sold this way. In addition, there is distribution according to need. A soup kitchen does this when it provides meals for the homeless. So does a public school that provides classroom aids for special education students. The way that a society answers the three economic questions will depend on its economic goals and social values. Most societies try to address some or all of the following 6 economic goals. In our society, we place a high value on economic freedom, the ability to make our own economic decisions without interference from the government. When you choose to buy something, whether it is a new game or a used car, you are exercising this freedom. If you choose to sell your car or go into a business, selling cars or anything else, you are exercising this freedom. A society that values economic freedom gives individuals and businesses the right to trade and make decisions about how to use their resources without government intervention. An efficient economy makes the most of a society's resources. It delivers the goods by allocating resources in such a way that the greatest number of consumers gets what they want with the least amount of waste. Because unemployment workers are a wasted resource, an efficient economy strives for full employment, which exists when all who want to work can find jobs. The term equity concerns fairness and justice. Economic equity involves the fair and just distribution of a society's wealth. A society that values economic equity seeks to give everyone a fair share of the economic pie. But what constitutes a fair share? Is it fair that corporate executives make millions of dollars while retail workers earn minimum wage? Is it fair that women collectively tend to earn less than men? People often disagree on questions of equity, which makes it a difficult goal to achieve. An economy is said to grow when it produces more and better goods and services. Economic growth is desirable because over time it leads to an improved standard of living. A century ago, middle-class Americans lived without cars, electricity, kitchen appliances, and indoor plumbing, not to mention antibiotics, frozen foods, and the internet. A key element of economic growth is scientific and technological innovation. New ideas and inventions bring new and improved products into the market. creating economic growth and raising living standards. Every society has people who cannot provide for themselves. They may be too young, too old, too sick, or too poor to meet all of their basic needs. A society that puts a high value on economic security seeks to provide its less fortunate members with the support they need in terms of food, shelter, and health care in order to live decently. This is another economic goal in which people often disagree. For example, in the United States, access to affordable health insurance, which most people need to pay for health care, differs from state to state. Even when Americans agree that access to health care should be provided by everyone and to everyone, they do not agree on how this goal should be accomplished. No one likes economic uncertainty. Societies themselves strive for the opposite, economic stability. Economic stability means that the goods and services we count on, electricity on demand, food and clothing in the stores, are there when we want them. Our jobs are there when we go to work each day. Prices are predictable, allowing us to plan ahead for purchases. Most societies consider these goals when making economic choices, but societies differ in the degree of importance in which they attach to each goal. Sometimes progress toward one goal can be achieved only at the expense of another. For example, when the government taxes our wages in order to pay unemployment benefits, it is contributing to society's economic security. But it is also encroaching on our economic freedom to control our own resources. Societies, like individuals, must weigh the trade-offs and costs of purchasing any particular set of economic goals. In the process of answering the three economic questions, every society develops an economic system. An economic system is a way a society coordinates the production and consumption of goods and services. Economic systems are as old as humankind, resulting in many different models. But if we strip away all of the cultural differences that exist between all of the societies that never existed, we find that history has produced only three basic types of economic systems. These are those built on tradition, those based on the command of rulers, and those organized by free markets. Each system answers the three economic questions differently, and each emphasizes different economic goals. The first and oldest economic system is the traditional economy. Traditional economies have existed since the first clans of hunter-gatherers emerged in Africa. In a traditional economy, custom and tradition dictate what to produce, how to produce it, and from whom. Most traditional economies that survive today think about what to produce, how to produce it, and for who they want to produce. They belong to indigenous people who live much like their ancestor did hundreds of thousands of years ago. The Masawi ancestors of East Africa, for example, are a semi-nomad herding people. Livestock, primarily cattle, is an important part of their economy. In Maasai, wealth is measured in cattle and children. The traditional Maasai diet consists primarily of meat, blood, and milk from cattle. And Maasai's answer to the question is what to produce, what cattle would be to produce it, because it is their centuries-old tradition to raise cattle. As for the question of how to produce, people in traditional economies engage in farming, herding, fishing, hunting, and the gathering of wild plants. Exactly who does what is determined by social customs, which can often divide labor along gender lines. And among the Maasai, for example, men build enclosures to protect the cattle from lions. Boys graze the cattle, and women and girls milk the cattle. Among the Khoisan people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, men hunt and women gather. For whom to produce is another question decided by tradition, and in which society hierarchies play an important role. A good illustration of this is the way meat is distributed among the Khoisan people of the Kalahari. After a hunt, the kill is divided up, with a large share going to the hunter. The hunter gives some to relatives, and they give part of theirs to other relatives, all according to the accepted social order. In the end, everyone gets enough to eat. The highest goals of people in a traditional economy are economic stability and security. However, for most traditional societies, this goal is increasingly difficult to attain. As modern economies exert an ever-growing influence, traditional societies are struggling to find a path to economic survival. The next economic system to develop is the command economy. In a command economy, decisions about what, how, and for whom to produce are made by a powerful ruler or some other authority. The earliest command economies originated in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and India about 5,000 years ago. As these civilizations became highly advanced, centralized governments arose that were headed by powerful rulers. These rulers then imposed their economic choices on society. However, at lower levels of society, much of the economic decisions were still guided by tradition. Rulers at the top of these early civilizations, kings, pharaohs, emperors, commanded the populace to devote economic resources to building projects or military exertions. Many thousands of people might be conscripted to build a pyramid, defensive wall, irrigation canal, temple, or road. In a pre-industrial age, such projects took vast quantities of human labor. Often many people would be drafted into a ruler's army and sent into battle in distant lands. The primary goal of these ancient command economies was to accumulate wealth and goods for the ruling class while preserving economic stability. The many monuments these societies left behind are a testament to both the productive power of these economies and the excesses of their rulers. The newest economic system to emerge in human history is the market economy. A market economy depends on the decisions of individual producers and consumers. Note that when economists speak of the market, they are referring to the economic system within which buyers and sellers exchange goods and services. This is distinct from an everyday market, which is a place where people buy and sell goods. In a free market economy, the workings of the market are not planned or directed. No single person, business, or government agency tells producers or consumers what to do. Economic decisions are made voluntarily by millions of individuals guided by self-interest. The highest goals of a market economy are economic freedom and efficiency. Individuals and businesses are left at liberty to decide what, how, and for whom to produce. The producers of goods and services make these decisions based largely on consumers' spending decisions. Because you are free to buy what you want, producers must compete for your money. This competition means that you, the consumer, have many choices. It also forces producers to use resources efficiently. If they do not, a competitor will find a way to offer the same good or service at a price that consumers will be more willing to pay. In a free market, individuals are encouraged to pursue jobs that allow them to make the most of their human capital. If one employer fails to pay an individual what they think they are worth, they can quit and seek employment elsewhere. Or they can start their own business, perhaps even offering new products and services to consumers. You might expect that the result of this individual decision-making in competition would be chaos. But just the opposite is true. Markets are highly efficient at producing a large variety of goods and services that people find attractive and at prices they are willing to pay. It was this coordinating power of markets that Adam Smith famously described as the invisible hand. He wrote, "Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand, to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interests, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it." Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1776. The reason markets work so well is that one person's output always becomes another person's input. Goods are produced and consumed. Money comes in and goes out. This flow is what keeps the economy running and booming. Economists use the circular flow model like the portrayed one in Figure 3.2 to illustrate these interactions. In the simplified market economy, there are two kinds of participants, households and firms. A household is made up of a person of a group of people living together. The model assumes that households own the factors of production. A firm is an organization that uses these factors to make and sell goods or services. The model also demonstrates two kinds of markets. One is the product market, in which goods and services are sold by firms and purchased by households. Your local mall or grocery store is part of the product market. The other is the factor market, in which households sell their land, labor, and capital to firms. A household, for example, might rent land to a firm. Or, members of a household might sell their labor to a firm for wages. They might loan money to a firm in exchange for interest payments, or they might buy a firm's stock in the hopes of receiving dividend payments. The funds paid to households, whether in the form of rent, wages, interest, or dividends, are known as factor payments. This model is circular. Households buy products from firms with money that they receive in the factor market. Firms acquire land, labor, and capital from households using money that they receive in the product market. For example, you, as a part of a household, might buy a pair of jeans from a firm with money that you earn by working at a local ice cream parlor, another firm. The ice cream parlor, in turn, pays you for your labor with money that it receives from selling ice cream cones to other households. All these transactions are conducted by people and businesses who want something for themselves. People work so that they can buy things. Firms employ people so that they can make things to sell. In a market economy, everybody chooses what is best for themselves. As Adam Smith observed, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Market economies emerged in Europe in the 1700s and began to grow rapidly in the 1800s. This economic growth was a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, new inventions and manufacturing processes spurred the growth of industry. Individual investors, called capitalists, grew wealthy by accumulating capital such as machinery, factories, and railroads. The term capitalism came to be synonymous with the free market economic system. The headlong growth of capitalism had profound effects on society. As more and better goods became widely available, people's standard of living improved. However, capitalism did not improve the quality of life for everybody. The workers who filled the factories and mills labored under harsh conditions, often working extremely long hours for meager wages. Critics of capitalism blamed the capitalists for exploiting workers and keeping them in poverty. In 1848, economist Karl Marx and philosopher Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto, in which they advocated the overthrow of capitalism. They proposed an alternative vision of society known as socialism. Socialism is a political and economic philosophy that calls for property to be owned by society as a whole rather than by individuals for the equal benefit of all. To bring about the socialist vision of society, Marx and Engels called on workers everywhere to revolt against their governments. They argued that once the workers had gained power, private property and the free market would be replaced with national ownership for industry and a more equal distribution of income. The final phase of socialism, in the view of Marx and Engels, is communism, a political and economic system in which all property and wealth are owned by all members of society. In a communist society, class differences and the conflicts they create disappear. Once that happens, government is no longer needed to keep order. Instead of self-interest, people in a communist society are guided by Marx's famous slogan, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." The ideas of Marx and Engels spurred the development of political movements dedicated to the creation of a workers' paradise. But when the first successful communist revolution took place in Russia in 1917, it did not lead to the utopian society Marx had envisioned. Instead, the revolutionaries formed an authoritarian government that pursued its socialist goals with brutal force. The renamed Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union for short, became the first modern command economy. In the Soviet Union, private ownership for property was forbidden, and the state owned the factors of production. Economic planning was done by government committees of economists, production experts, and political officials. These central planning committees attempted to perform the functions of a market. They decided what goods and services should be produced, as well as decided which farms and factories should get which resources to produce what was planned. Committees also controlled prices and wages and decided how goods and services were to be distributed. In theory, this kind of planning was supposed to ensure economic equity and security, two important goals of a modern command economy, but the reality was very different. The planning committees could not keep track of the millions of products and prices in the Soviet system. Two Soviet economists, Nikolai Shimolev and Vladimir Popov, described what happened when Gost Osman, the committee in charge of prices, raised the price that the government would pay hunters for moleskins. State purchases increased, and now all the distribution centers are filled with these pelts. The Ministry of Light Industry has already requested Gotskobsten twice to lowering purchasing prices, but they have no time. They have to keep track of another 24 million prices. The turning point. Revitalizing the social economy, revitalizing it in 1990. In this planned economy, shortages were common. Long lines would form to buy whatever goods suddenly became available. But once a customer got to the front of that line, choice was limited or non-existent. Planners made matters worse by ignoring the incentives matter principle. The wages paid to workers were determined by government committees, not a worker's ability or output. A poor worker could not be fired for slacking off, nor could a good worker be rewarded for working hard. Under this system, workers lacked incentive to produce high-quality goods or to innovate to increase productivity. As a result, production was slow and the goods produced were often far inferior to those produced in a market economy. The Soviet Union did succeed in increasing economic equity and security for their people. But what is the benefit to a guaranteed income if there is nothing to buy? What markets do effortlessly command economies struggle to do? Certain planning was so inefficient that the Soviet Union economy eventually collapsed. Since then, virtually all modern command economies have either failed or struggled to introduce market-based reforms. No country in the world today relies on a purely traditional market or command economic system. These systems represent theoretical extremes. Nearly all countries have mixed economies that fall somewhere in between these extremes. In a mixed economy, both the government and individuals play important roles with regard to production and consumption. But who decides what varies from one country to another? Every nation with a mixed economy forges its own balance between market freedom and government involvement. At this minimum, governments are needed to establish the institutions that enable markets to operate. Such institutions include a legal system to enforce laws and a stable system of currency. Without these institutions, the market would be unable to function. In many countries, people expect further government involvement. They want it to step in when the market operates in ways that society finds unacceptable. For example, many nations outlaw child labor. Some governments limit the amount of pollution that industries can discharge. In the United States, the government regulates the manufacture of cosmetics, foods, and drugs because consumers want to know that products on the market are safe. Not all governments regulate the manufacturing of products to the same degree. Each society decides how involved the government will be in curtailing the freedom of the market. Finally, government provides certain goods and services that markets do not always provide or do not always provide enough of. Examples include public works or government financial projects such as dams, highways, and sewer systems. The market does not provide these goods because, as Adam Smith explained, the cost of providing them could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals. What a government provides varies from country to country. In Canada and much of Europe, free health care is provided to every citizen. Some governments provide free college education or free daycare. Governments that provide a high level of goods and services also tax heavily to buy for those goods and services. Again, there are economic choices that every nation makes differently. How does government participation in the economy change the flow of monies and goods? The answer to this can be seen by adding government to the circular flow model. A government enters the flow of money and products through an economy in a number of ways. It purchases land, labor, and capital from households in the factor market. In the United States, the federal government employs just under 3 million civilian employees, making it the nation's largest employer. A government also purchases goods and services from firms in the product market. As the nation's largest employer, the federal government is also its largest customer, spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year on goods and services. Governments also combine land, labor, and capital to produce and distribute goods and services. For instance, suppose a town decides it needs a library. The town government buys land and hires architects and builders in the factor market. Later, the town buys books, shelves, computers, and furniture in the product market. Finally, it hires librarians in the factor market. The end result is a public service that the entire community can enjoy. Now, follow the flow of money in a mixed economy. You will see that a government collects taxes from both households and firms. It uses some of this money to pay for the goods and services that it buys from firms. It may also transfer some money back to households as payments for government benefits. Social security checks, welfare payments, and unemployment benefits are examples of government transfer payments. Although most of today's economies can be described as mixed, the mix of market freedom and government control varies greatly from one nation to the next. Each year, the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal publish their annual Index of Economic Freedom. This index is a kind of scorecard that ranks the economic freedom of the world's nations. It is a useful tool for understanding the variety of mixed economies. In 2018, Australia rated one of the most free economies in the world. Free markets dominate Australia's mixed economy. All banks are privately owned. The economy is open to foreign investment and trade. Private property is very scarce. Starting a business is easy, taking an average of only 2.5 days. At the very bottom of the list is North Korea, which came in last of the 180 ranked nations. A communist country since 1948, North Korea still has a tightly controlled command economy in which the government directs all industries and businesses. Nearly all foreign trade is forbidden and private property is severely restricted. What about countries that fall somewhere in between, such as Japan, South Africa, and France? All three have mixed economies dominated by the market system. All have relatively high levels of economic freedom and secure property rights, but they also have high tax rates which are used to pay for an array of public services such as government-provided health care. And in these nations, people have decided that achieving economic equity and security for more members of society is worth giving up some measures of their individual wealth. Further down in the rankings is China, which is rated mostly unfree. China, which has had a communist government since 1949, is in transition from a command economy to a market-oriented system, but its mixed economy is still dominated by an authoritarian government. All Chinese banks are owned by the state. Private property is not secure and internet use is tightly controlled by the government. Still, China allows more economic freedom than many countries. Cuba, for example, is rated repressed, as its economy is dominated by the state. As in repressed North Korea, foreign investment in Cuba is severely restricted. Only 5 nations in the 2018 Index of Economic Freedoms plus Hong Kong were rated free. In addition to Australia, these countries are Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Ireland. What do these countries have in common? All have mixed economies dominated by free markets. Must have democratic forms of government, most having this form of government. They are also all among the wealthiest nations in the world. As Adam Smith might have predicted, the societies with the most economic freedom are also among the most prosperous. The high ranking of the United States on the Index of Economic Freedom is not surprising. Americans value their economic freedom so much so that our economy is often described as a free enterprise system. In a free enterprise system, individuals own the factors of production and make decisions on how to use those factors within the framework of the law. 7 key characteristics of a free enterprise system are explored below. As the term free enterprise suggests, the essence of our nation's economic system is freedom. The ability of individuals to act in their own best interest in free markets. In practical terms, this means that we can buy what we want and from whomever we want. If we do not like what one firm is selling, we can take our business elsewhere. We are free to start businesses or to seek any job we choose. Firms are free to make what they want, hire whomever they choose, and set their own wages and prices. Because our economic system allows individuals and businesses so much freedom, it is often referred to as a laissez-faire economy. Economists use the term laissez-faire to describe a market economy that is relatively free from government intervention. In French, laissez-faire means let them do. But in fact, laws do exist that limit what producers and consumers can do in the United States. Stores, for example, are not free to sell alcohol to teenagers. Businesses are not free to hire child laborers. Economic freedom does not give anyone the right to break the law. However, it does allow us to act in our own economic best interests within the law, because virtually anyone can enter the market at any time. Many rival sellers usually vie for customers' business. The resulting competition is a hallmark of the free enterprise system. Competition provides an incentive for businesses to create new and better products and ways of serving customers. For consumers, this means more goods and services to choose from. Competition also encourages producers to use resources efficiently, using their resources in order to lower costs. When lower costs translate into lower prices, consumers win again. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Most Americans today understand these words to mean that we are born equal in terms of our rights, freedoms, and the opportunity to make the best of our talents and abilities. Our belief in the United States as a land of opportunity is deeply rooted in our country's history as a nation of immigrants. Nonetheless, our free enterprise system has not always offered equal opportunity to everyone. Women, African Americans, and other minority groups have had to fight discrimination in education and employment. Through the efforts of citizens and government intervention, these barriers to economic opportunity have begun to fall, providing more equal opportunities for every person to gain an education and compete in the marketplace. In business, a contract is an agreement between a buyer and a seller. Contracts are used in all types of economic transactions. Even the receipt that you sign when you use a credit card is a contract. In our free enterprise system, people are free to decide what contracts they want to enter into. But once agreed on, a contract is binding. That means that both sides have to fulfill their needs and their ends of the deal. Because free enterprise depends on buyers and sellers honoring their agreements, it is important to have a legal system that upholds contracts. U.S. courts recognize the binding nature of contracts. They also recognize that people and businesses can run into financial problems and become unable to pay their debts. Bankruptcy is the legal process by which such situations can be resolved. Although bankruptcy allows people in debt to get a fresh start financially, a major downside is the negative effect bankruptcy will have on their credit card reports, which will make it difficult to obtain loans in the future. Furthermore, not all debts are eliminated during bankruptcy. A necessary element of a free enterprise system is the right to own property. Property rights are the rights of those who own land, buildings, or other goods to use or dispose of as they choose. In other countries, past and present, rulers have had the power to seize another person's property for their own use. The U.S. Constitution protects against this abuse of power. It guarantees access to the courts in case of disputes about property. It further guarantees that an owner will be paid for property that is taken by the government for public use. These conditional guarantees are crucial to the free market. Why would people buy homes or start businesses unless they were certain that they would get to keep their property? The Constitution also protects intellectual property by empowering Congress to enact patent and copyright laws. Intellectual property refers to creations of the mind that have commercial value. A patent gives an inventor the sole right to make, use, or sell his or her invention for 20 years. A copyright similarly gives the creator of a literary or artistic work the sole right to reproduce, distribute, perform, or display the copyrighted work. Current copyrights last for 70 years beyond the life of the author. Why do we need intellectual property laws? Think about what would happen without them. As soon as a new invention or book or song became public, others would copy it and put it on the market. The inventor or writer or composer would therefore receive no reward for his or her efforts. Without a reward, inventors and creatives would have no incentive to invent new things or create new works. Patents, patents, and copyrights encourage creativity and innovation by guaranteeing that inventors and artists can profit from their creations. If any single force could be said to drive a free enterprise system, it is the profit motive. Profit is the money earned by a business after subtracting its costs of operation. The desire to make a profit is known as the profit motive. The profit motive is closely tied to the incentive matter principle. Profits are our own incentive to work or start businesses in the hope of making money for ourselves. Some people confuse the profit motive with greed or stealing wealth from others. Most economists, however, see the profit motive possibly and in a positive way, as it is the reason most businesses exist. As Adam Smith observed, people produce goods and services in order to improve their economic situation, to make a profit. The final key characteristic of a free enterprise system is a relatively limited role for government in the economy. In the United States, the government does not try to control firms, nor does it often compete with firms. Government intervention in the economy is generally limited to several different areas. The government enforces laws that protect property owners and patent and copyright holders. The government funds projects and programs that benefit society as a whole. The government enacts laws that protect and preserve a competitive marketplace. The government requires a business to ensure that their products do not harm consumers. It also imposes regulations on firms to promote workplace safety and to reduce pollution. The government works to keep the economy growing steadily rather than alternating between periods of boom and bust. Let's return to the question we started with. Who or what decides what you get? In our economic system, the answer is both a who and a what. The what is the market, made up of millions of individuals who buy and sell goods every day on a strictly voluntary basis. The who is you, your family, and your friends, all exercising your freedom of choice as consumers. What are the effects of these choices? Later you'll learn more about how the choices you and others make in the market help determine what you might get tomorrow. To summarize, because resources are always scarce compared to people's wants, all societies must make choices about what to have and what to give up. How those choices are made depends on a society's economic system. Every society is faced with three economic questions. What goods and services should be produced? How should they be produced? Who should get what is produced? How a society answers those questions depends on its economic goals. These goals include economic freedom, efficiency, equity, growth, security, and stability. Over time, societies have developed three economic systems to answer these questions. In a traditional economy, decisions are dictated by custom and tradition. In a command economy, a powerful ruler or government makes decisions. In a market economy, decisions are made by the interactions of individual producers and consumers. Each system emphasizes different economic goals. Most countries today have a mixed economy, in which both the government and individuals have a voice in economic decisions. Who decides what varies greatly. Some countries, including the United States, minimize government regulation of the market. Others, such as China, still exercise considerable government control over economic activities. Americans decide their economy as a free enterprise system. This system has 7 key characteristics. Economic freedom to buy and sell what we want and to work where we want. Competition among firms, which try to attract customers with new and better products. Equal opportunity to make the best use of our talents, abilities, and education. Property rights that allow us to buy, own, and sell goods and intellectual property. Binding contracts which give us confidence that others will abide by their agreements. The profit motive, which provides an incentive to work and start new businesses, and limiting government that regulates without controlling individuals, firms, or the market.